Welcome back for episode 2 of Leadership That Liberates. Today, I really want to tell you more about my leadership framework, which really is existing under this larger sort of approach that I've named Liberatory Love, and how I really think the world we want to see and the world we're here to create requires us to live and lead from love. I don't really even have a name for my framework yet, though it's been really fleshed out and developed, and I'm excited to tell you more about it. And that might sound a little bit boring and dry. Oh, we're going to talk about a leadership framework. But y'all, these are life skills. This is really a way of living and being in the world and being with yourself. And so to talk about this, we first have to talk about what all of my work is actually about, which I did allude to in episode 1 when I talked about this recursive relationship between personal self-suppression and global systems of oppression. These things really go hand in hand. They're inseparable from one another. We are who we are because of the systems we live within, and the systems we live within are as they are because of how we show up in the world, and oftentimes in ways that we're not aware of. And that is really what my work is about. It's how the unconscious beliefs, the unconscious fears, the unconscious desires that we have are driving our lives in ways that shape our lived experience and the world we live in. So, I want to tell you about this framework, but first I have to tell you about the recursive relationship between this individual process of suppressing parts of self and how that then becomes part of our collective experience through the systems that we live within. So we can look at it really as this relationship between the layers of the soul, the self, societies, and greater systems. And I think it often feels easier for people to begin at systems that can feel more accessible because we see them, we live within them, they are all around us. And of course, there are people in the world who don't necessarily see them, but that's because we are conditioned and programmed to accept that's the way things are. And that's part of the challenge, because then it becomes, in so many ways, part of our unconscious relationship to everything around us as well. So, if we're going to start at the level of systems, I like to define this for us. And so, systems are a set of interconnected components that work together to achieve a particular function or purpose. So then systems of oppression would be a set of interconnected components that work together to achieve oppression. And systems of oppression are structures, institutions, practices that systematically and systemically disadvantage and marginalize certain groups of people based on oftentimes what are actually cultural constructs, not even things that are real, but real in consequence: race, gender, ethnicity, things like religion, socioeconomic status, ability, disability, all of these different components that really people are oppressed on the basis of. And systems of oppression are designed to perpetuate inequality and maintain power imbalances by limiting the opportunities, the rights, and the resources available to certain people. And systems of oppression are, of course, embedded within our social structures, our institutions, our legal frameworks, our education system, our economics, policies, cultural norms. And examples of systems of oppression are white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, which are very, of course, tied into white supremacy, heteronormativity, homophobia, cisnormativity, all these things around gender, ableism. These are all examples of systems of oppression. Now, we go to the level of society. So societies are like little microcosms of systems of oppression. And a society is really a group of individuals who share common elements, such as culture, institutions, norms. And culture and norms, that's made up of language, of our belief systems, our values, traditions, historical narratives that tell the story of a group of people, the institutions within that society, an institution being family, things like education, religion, government, economies. Essentially, societies are culturally contextualized expressions or manifestations of systems of oppression. So the patriarchy looks different in Zimbabwe than it does in Thailand, than it does in the US, but it's still the patriarchy. It has its own unique expression because it's colored by the customs, the traditions, the history, the language, the belief system of a group of people, but it's still the same thing. It's just operating in a slightly different way. Same thing for all of the other systems of oppression. They might look, feel, smell, taste a little different in every context, within every society, within every culture, group of people, nation, state, but they're the same thing. We are then conditioned and programmed according to the society we live within, which is again a microcosm of these larger systems. And so when we come into the world, the expectations that are put onto us are a reflection of these societal norms, which are informed by these larger systems. And our caregivers, our parents, or whoever it is that raises us or is responsible for us, the adults in our lives, they have been shaped and molded by these systems. And so their beliefs, their practices, their worldviews are reflections, even if they're rejections, of the larger framework within which they live, they are still somehow a reflection of that framework. And we are internalizing and absorbing the beliefs they have taken on, the practices they have decided to make their own or not, the values that they have chosen. We are then being influenced and shaped and informed by them and the people who came before them and the people who came before them. It's generational. And so, on the individual level, as children, we are dependent on these adults in our lives to meet our needs. And we're dependent on them to create this sense of belonging in the world that we're actually very wired for. And through this process of our psychological development as children, we are picking up all of these cues and messages from around us, whether it is from our caretakers directly or from the things that we're seeing on TV or the music that we're hearing or whatever they're talking about in our church or our place of worship or whatever, if our family is religious. And even if they're not, the society is shaped by the dominant religion of that society. So we're still absorbing those messages, those values, those norms. And through that process of absorption and internalization, we are learning what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is unacceptable. What will I be praised for? What will I be punished for? What will I be loved for? And where are the conditions on love? And so we are molding our little selves to meet what we think will ensure that we are cared for, that our needs are met, that we are accepted, that we have a sense of belonging, that we are safe. And so we are developing what has been called the false self. It's really this mask or this facade that we present to the world, but oftentimes we don't know that it's a mask or a facade. For us, it's our quote unquote personality. And in this process of developing our personality and the way we present to the world, we are suppressing parts of us that do not fit into what society deems normal or acceptable. And those parts of ourselves are cast into what is called the shadow. They become what is called the shadow. And this is Jungian psychology. There's a lot of misperception, misunderstanding around the shadow. There are a lot of connotations with the shadow. Oh, that's dark, bad, negative, evil. Those are the bad things, the demons in the closet. And it's actually no, it's really not that. What becomes part of the shadow is anything that we somehow directly or indirectly learn is not acceptable. And that's going to depend on the environment that we're in. So it could be something like anger, jealousy, manipulation. It could also be creativity, playfulness, childlikeness. And so these are parts of ourselves that become part of the shadow, which essentially means that we disown or disregard them in terms of our conscious identity. So we disregard them in the sense that we don't consciously identify with them, but they don't go away. They become part of our unconscious mind. And our unconscious, our subconscious drives 95% of our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, our behaviors. Our subconscious mind is actually responsible for the ways we move through the world, but it's also the parts of us we can't see. And so many aspects of these larger systems become part of the subconscious. And so we may not realize that actually we have qualities and characteristics that we think we don't have. And in fact, it's the very things we don't identify with that inform the beliefs we have about ourselves and the world, that inform the kinds of people we attract in partnership, the kind of relationships we tend to get into, informs the ways we move through the world, the way we relate to other people. It is at the core and the center of what creates our lived experience in so many ways, but it's also the part of ourselves that we're not aware of. We don't even know they're there. And so that's why so much of my work is actually about uncovering, unearthing these shadow aspects and how they are actually at the forefront of situations we find ourselves in, of challenges we continue to face again and again. And that happens on the individual level in our lives, but it's also translating into the bigger picture of our collective experience. And so, aside from all of that, is the soul. As we are developing our self, which is this reflection of the societies and the systems that we're in, the self becomes more and more disconnected from that soul essence. So, who we really are without our programming, without our conditioning. And in addition to all this social sciencey stuff, I'm also an astrologer. And the way that I look at astrology is really this evolutionary approach, which uses a person's chart to understand the beliefs, the experiences, the conditions, the limitations that someone is here to break free of on their journey to reconnect with the essence of their soul, with the spirit of truth and life and love that is within each one of us. And it doesn't matter what an individual's story is, for all of us, the purpose of our incarnation is to learn liberation. That is literally why we come to this earth, to learn liberation. How to liberate ourselves from the confines and constrictions of our conditioning. That's literally why we come to earth. And it is through this process of liberating ourselves that we also create this collective experience of liberation. So we come to earth to learn liberation for ourselves and for each other. And so now, to tell you more about this leadership framework that I've been developing, we can think of it as a tree. That's really what this whole kind of framework and model is designed on, is this imagery of a big, beautiful tree. And if we can imagine that we are seeds, and a seed already contains within it the potential for the tree. The seed already contains the whole tree within it. And so we are each a seed. And as we are growing and developing into this tree of our being, we are having experiences in life that shape our beliefs, whether they are conscious or unconscious. And these beliefs and these experiences in our life, they're the roots of the tree. The soil that the tree is planted in, it's the context. It's the soil that you are planted in. So it's a reflection of your ancestry, your heritage, your lineage, generational patterns, the beliefs, values of your family, your caretakers, of the religion of your family and caretakers, or of the dominant cultural context, the social norms, the cultural norms. That's the soil that we're planted in. And that soil informs our roots, the health and vitality of our roots. And those roots, again, are the experiences we have as a result of the soil we're planted in, and then the beliefs that we form as a result of those lived experiences. Again, they are what drive our lives and the ways that we show up in the world and the ways that we lead in the world. And where are they? They're in it's the dirt, right? It's under the surface. And so it's the unconscious material, the shadow stuff. It's stuff that we're not necessarily aware of, but it is what the life of the tree depends on. The quality of life of the tree depends on the quality of the roots and the soil. And if we're not tending to that part, honestly, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters without that part. And the trunk of the tree, really the part of the tree that supports everything, the branches and the leaves and the fruits and the flowers, the core, the foundation, what's really holding up this tree. And so within my approach, I talk about these 10 pillars of practice. So there are 10 qualities, characteristics that I think we individually and collectively need to practice more and more because these are the kinds of things we've become disconnected from through this disconnection with our soul's essence. And so there are 10 pillars of practice, and they represent the trunk of the tree, the fortitude of the tree, the strength and resiliency of the tree. But also remember that's very dependent on the roots and the soil. I'm going to talk about the pillars in a second, but it's basically like when we're tending to the roots and we're caring for them and we're nourishing the soil and we're cultivating these capacities to keep the tree strong and stable and sturdy. It's then that we have these branches of the tree, which for me represent the policies and the practices, the procedures that kind of get put into place in a society. And then we have the leaves or the fruits and all of the other parts of the tree have to be tended to for it to be possible for us to experience what I am calling the leaves of liberation and the fruits of freedom, empathy, compassion, curiosity, justice, equity, equality, inclusion, belonging. These are the leaves of liberation, the fruits of freedom. But they're not possible without tending to what's under the soil and cultivating the practices that support the tree of our being, which this tree can represent our individual selves, but it's also our collective self, our collective experience in the world that we live in. My whole body of work was born out of this realization that the divisions between us are a reflection of the disconnect within us. And we keep trying to address the divisions without actually really tending to the disconnection. And so, band-aid solutions, we're treating the symptoms, but if we're never looking at the root of the problem, what's actually going on beneath the surface, in the soil, what we want to do at this top level, it can't happen. It's not possible. And leadership, it's all about skill development, but it's like there's a part that comes before that. And it's tending to the roots of our tree with care and compassion and assessing the soil. What's in the soil? Was it nourished? Did it have minerals and vitamins in there? Probably not. Not too much of it. Most of us didn't get a lot of that. And so we have to start by tending to the roots of our being and looking at the soil that created the conditions for the quality and vitality of those roots themselves. And that's why my work really starts at looking at how did my lived experiences, which were shaped by the environment I was in, how did those create these unconscious beliefs and unconscious biases and unconscious fears and even unconscious desires? And so it requires us to look at the shadow. It requires us to look at the pieces and parts of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, disowned, suppressed, repressed, which we think are not part of our lived experience, but actually drive everything we believe about ourselves and the world and the ways that we show up in our lives and in our leadership. And that means we have to look at pain. That means we have to look at pain. And that is so uncomfortable. And that's why one of my favorite quotes comes from James Baldwin. He said, I imagine that we cling so stubbornly to our hate because we know that without that hate, we would have to face pain. I literally think that is the source of division collectively is rooted in this individual pain we refuse to look at. And the pain that becomes mirrored, expressed, reflected in our collective experience because we are one. The mycelium networks that connect all the other trees to one another. And so we are individuals, but we don't exist without one another. We are all part of this interconnectedness. And my lived experience affects your lived experience, affects this other person's lived experience. The mycelium connects us all. We are all connected. And so we are together, all of us together, creating a collective experience, a collective reality. The systems we live within also live within each and every one of us. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how you identify, doesn't matter how quote unquote woke you are, doesn't matter. These systems live within you. And we are recreating these systems because we won't tend to the roots of our being. We won't look at the soil that shaped us. And so my leadership approach begins with that. That's what we do. We tend to our hearts and to our souls. And we look at our shadows and we give them so much fucking compassion because these unconscious parts of ourselves, they're self-protective. We put these parts of ourselves, these qualities, these things that we don't want to identify with, they become part of the shadow because it is a self-protective mechanism. And some people, their self-protection is rooted in internalization of experience. So some of us respond to the pain in our life by becoming smaller, making ourselves less than, silencing our voices, hiding, people pleasing, self-extraction. Others of us externalize our painful experiences. So in the case where we internalize, we make it about us. I'm bad. I'm wrong. I have to be less than. I have to be smaller. Something's wrong or bad with me. Those of us who externalize our pain blame it on the outside. They did this. They did that. They hurt me. They're bad. They're wrong. Those people become bigger. They become louder. They become exploitative and extractive. they extract from other people. We're all extracting, we're all exploiting. Some of us are doing it to ourselves, and others of us are doing it to others. It's the same thing. It has a different expression, but it still is part of all of us, still lives within all of us. And we recreate systems of harm when we don't face the pain at the root of that harm. And so that is why my work begins with the shadow and shadow work, which shadow work is really just about uncovering, unearthing the beliefs and behaviors and patterns that are outside of our conscious awareness. It's identifying what role it has played to put those things within the shadow. What is the self-protective mechanism at play? Why did that piece or part of you have to become part of the shadow? What role did that serve to protect you? And then how is it no longer serving? Why is it actually just creating barriers and limitations now in the ways that you move through life and through the world? And then we integrate that part into the consciousness, into our awareness. And so, how do I learn to meet that part with compassion, with grace? How do I welcome it into the fold of all that I am and learn to be with it in ways that support the health and livelihood of my being, of my tree, of our collective experience? And so then we have the pillars. Okay, so then there's the pillars of practice, the 10 things. And for me, this is like leadership skills. And this is after we do the root work and the soil reconnaissance. That's then when we get into developing our leadership skills. And for me, there are these 10 qualities that I think we need to reconnect with and cultivate and practice in order to achieve the kind of life and world we desire. I'm not going to say too much about all of these. I'm really just going to give a little preview into each one because I offer entire leadership labs around each one of these pillars that are hours long. And so I clearly could say a lot about each one of these things, but I'm just going to give you the highlight, like a little snippet of what it actually is. So the first pillar of practice is sovereignty, self-sovereignty. And that's really becoming aware of this difference between internal versus external power. And we tend to think really negatively about power because of how power is used and misused and abused in our world. But that's not real power. That is actually an attempt to feel powerful in the absence of power. So people who are actually powerless will misuse, and abuse power to feel as though they are powerful, but that's not real power. Real power is to be connected to the spirit of truth and love and light from which you came, your soul essence. And so sovereignty, self-sovereignty, it's at the foundation of everything. And it's really about redefining what power actually means and what that actually looks like. The second pillar of practice is reflexivity. And reflexivity is deep self-inquiry. It's having the courage and humility to look really honestly at ourselves and to examine our motivations, our reactions, the root causes. It is diving into the shadows and doing deep shadow work. So, reflexivity is the second pillar of practice. The third pillar is attunement. We have to be really aware of what's going on to be able to attune to it. And attunement is about attuning to ourselves and to other people and to the world around us. And it's about being connected and receptive and responsive, which requires presence and mindfulness. And so it's this awareness of what's happening within, being really cued in to what's happening with others, and noticing and being sensitive to what's happening in the world, and being able to receive that and respond to it in appropriate ways. Because our responses tend to be reflective of the past. When you have an overreaction to something, it's because you're not actually reacting to what's happening in the present moment. You're reacting to the past and how that the present moment activates that past experience. But usually we're not conscious of that. So a lot of the reactivity we see in the world is an overreaction to a past pain that someone's not actually aware of. The fourth pillar is congruence. And I have heard someone describe congruence as when my insides match my outsides. And so I think integrity is a piece or part of this. Martha Beck defines integrity as to be one thing, whole and undivided. And so congruence is really about this inner work that we're doing being reflected in the ways that we live our lives, in the ways that we move through the world. And that requires us to honor and accept all the parts of us. And so things like inner child work, reparenting ourselves, they're part of creating congruence. And again, that's a practice. The fifth pillar of practice is capacity. And that's really about expanding our capacity. I think our capacity expands in relation to our own empowerment, our own ability to be connected to the power within us. And our capacity is in many ways related to our nervous system. How much can we hold? How much can we be with? And it's about this expansion, which is also paired with contraction. So it's only normal as we have the courage to do things that feel scary. We'll make a little bit of momentum and then we'll contract because that's scary. I've learned in the past that isn't safe. And so self-protective mechanisms come into play and then we contract a little bit. But cultivating capacity is about developing the ability to not collapse in the contraction, to not wither up and just lose our ability to actually be in the world because we're so fearful. Expanding our capacity is about working with our nervous system and the ways that it is attuned to the world around us. And again, that requires us to tend to ourselves, to have care, to have compassion, to learn, like, what is my body actually telling me? How is my nervous system responding in these different environments, in these different situations? How do I meet the needs of my little self and of my body as I move through my life and through the world? And then the sixth pillar of practice is plurality. And cultivating our capacity helps us be with plurality, which is really about the ability to hold multiple truths at one time. I really believe that so much of the division in our world is connected to our inability to be with multiple truths. That lots of things can actually be true at the same time, that there's nuance and complexity. It's not either or, black or white, this or that, me or you, us or them. Lots of things can be true at the same time, and things that contradict each other can be true at the same time. And so plurality is the ability to hold multiple truths and worldviews and parts of self, to be with all the contradictions that create discomfort. And the discomfort is there because contradiction creates uncertainty. How do we hold both? This and that, and this and that. How do we hold the contradictions, the paradoxes? Because the uncertainty that they present us with feels unsafe. That's why it's so hard to be with multiple truths and realities. But there are multiple truths and realities, and we have to learn to hold them and to be with them. And the seventh pillar of practice is generativity. And generativity is really, I think, about having this hope in the world, a sense of purpose, a vision for what could be, and how we fit into that bigger picture. What puzzle piece are we in the bigger picture? Generativity is about using our gifts and our own magic. And it's this expression of our inner power to empower others and to make an impact in the world and to leave a legacy. And then the eighth pillar of practice is stewardship. And stewardship is really about stewarding, being a steward of our visions, being a steward of our thoughts, of ourselves, of our world, of nature. It is caring for the vision that you have, for the being that you are, caring for other people in the world. It is about a sense of responsibility and accountability and humility, and requires devotion and reverence and veneration. So how are we stewarding ourselves? How are we being stewards in the world? These are things we have to practice. The ninth pillar of practice is aliveness. And it's something we're so disconnected from. Aliveness is about pleasure and play and creativity and reclaiming joy and letting things be easy and easeful. And then finally, the 10th pillar of practice is audacity. It's about the bravery and the courage to go against the grain, the willingness to be misunderstood, to speak and act in alignment with your deepest convictions, even in the face of abandonment or rejection, even when it doesn't make sense to other people. It's the audacity to live in congruence with the truth of your convictions. Okay. So the first part of the process in this leadership approach, it's the root work, right? It's tending to the roots, it's nourishing our soil, it's looking at the soil we were planted in, what was missing, what needs to be added, what minerals and vitamins should we like sprinkle in there to reshape our relationship to the lived experiences, which are the roots, that really support the vitality and livelihood of the tree of our being and our collective experience. And then this trunk of the tree is about these pillars of practice, of really cultivating these qualities and capacities in our lives. And then from there, we can create these branches, these policies, these procedures, these systems that operate, that our world kind of runs on. We can create those from this place of really having looked at our pain and given it so much love and compassion, and then cultivating these capacities and these qualities to fortify our being. And so then we're creating policies and practices and procedures in the world that are a reflection of being so deeply rooted in our own inner power that it's not necessary to extract or exploit from ourselves or other people. And that is how we cultivate these leaves of liberation and these fruits of freedom. That is how we get to this place of equity and justice and equality and inclusion and belonging and all of these things that we want to see in our world. But it doesn't matter who we are. We all have to start at the roots of our being, and we have to be willing to face pain and to be with pain. We literally can't create the world we want to create if we don't look at the pain that it's built on. That's really what my body of work is all about, what this leadership framework, this approach, liberatory love. Again, we come here to learn liberation. And liberation is really about reconnecting to the truth of our being, to the source of our soul, which is actually love. It's just that it becomes so distorted as we become conditioned into these norms that we're born into. We have to create new norms, but we cannot do that if we're not really working with the roots of our being. That is what liberatory love is actually about. It's about meeting ourselves with so much grace and compassion and really understanding why we are the way we are, and then extending that same compassion to other people, realizing that they've gone through this same process as we have, and that so much of their beliefs and their behaviors and their actions are just an absorption and a repeating of things that they've learned from other people who were hurt and wounded and didn't look at their pain. And again, some of us are internalizing our pain, and others of us are externalizing it. Some of us are harming other people. Some of us are harming ourselves. And inevitably, we're all doing all of it. Doesn't matter how well-intentioned we are, if we're not really doing shadow work and looking at the pieces and parts of these systems we've internalized in ways that we're not aware of, we just will create more of the same. If we don't look at our pain, we will continue to create more of the same. Stay tuned because in next episode, I am going to walk you through this process with a very personal example and how it really reflects all these different layers. And this process of shadow work that I've taken myself through and how that fits into generational patterns and collective trauma and how that was manifesting in my life and in my leadership. It is fascinating, especially the way that it touches on all of these different layers. I look forward to sharing that with you then.